Hello, class. Welcome back. If you are taking my class from the university, we are at day 4 or part 2 of the musculoskeletal system. If not, I'm Ken Vitale. I'm a physician and professor at the university. I teach anatomy as well as physiology, and we're going to review some little tips and tricks and some learning points here in terms of mnemonics and a couple clinical correlations. So let's get started. First thing that comes up that a lot of students ask is, what's the difference between a dislocation and a separation? Oh, he got a separated shoulder. Oh, he got a dislocated shoulder. Well, it depends on the joint. If we are talking about a shoulder dislocation, sorry, I'm trying to bring my laser pointer. There it is. It is the glenohumeral joint, the main ball and socket joint that pops out. And that is a major injury that people have a sling. They have to go to rehab. Sometimes they have to have surgery for it. Contrast that with a shoulder separation. Quarterback falls on his shoulder and gets a separated shoulder. That is a much quicker return. It is the collarbone joint that has the ligament tearing, and there is a separated shoulder here that often does not necessarily need surgery, and they can get back into exercise activity and sport quicker. Here's another example, everything on the same slide here. When you pop the ball out of the socket right there, that is a dislocation. Above that right there, the collarbone, the end of the clavicle right there, and then the acromion there, that is a separated shoulder. Next, what's the difference between tennis elbow and golfer's elbow? Just to let you know right now, it's very similar condition. It's just a different part of the elbow. So if you imagine your elbow, the outer or lateral side of the elbow, the lateral epicondyle, that is where you get tennis elbow. The inside of the elbow at the medial epicondyle, that's where you get golfer's elbow. And it does have to do with the motion here. When you're doing a backhand in tennis and your elbow has to do a lot of the extension, the forearm extensors get overworked, and that's tennis elbow. Whereas the flexion part, when you're swinging a golf club and you're doing a lot of flexion, then your medial epicondyle gets overworked, and that is golfer's elbow. So it's a similar condition, treated very similarly, same pathology, just a different side of the elbow from a different motion. The neat thing is, many golfers get tennis elbow and many tennis players get golfer's elbow. It's just the way it is. And a lot of people, just from typing and gripping and lifting and carrying smartphones and iPads and things like that, they get tennis and golfer's elbow as well. So it's not just from sport. All right, the brachial plexus. This is perhaps my favorite one here. I'm going to draw some things out, change the camera in a minute. But if you study hard, you can draw out the brachial plexus in a minute, actually way less than a minute, and I'll show you how we do that. So the brachial plexus is very complex, starts all the way up at the neck, C5 to T1, has all these different branches that innervate the entire upper extremity and a lot of different muscles and sensory areas of the arm. It does look pretty daunting when you have to draw everything out, but it's actually not that hard if you just have a system to draw it. And we're talking about up here, not the individual muscles once they become a final branch or nerve of the upper extremity. Not all of those, that's a whole separate lecture. We're talking about the brachial plexus itself, which is up top. So how do we do that? This is a good place to start. You break things down in this example, on the right, you go from right to left, from roots, then you have trunks. There are 3 different trunks. Then everything divides anteriorly and posteriorly into divisions. Then you form 3 different chords, kind of like the 3 different trunks. And then finally, they do separate again, and you form the final branches or nerves of the brachial plexus. There is a fairly easy way to remember this. The one that I learned from my time back in the 1990s in medical school: Randy Travis drinks cold beer. That is not Randy Travis. That is Randy Travis, a country music star. Some people don't like country music. Some people don't like beer. Some people are cat lovers. So red trucks drive cats nuts. That's another one that I learned, and that works too. By the way, once you learn the brachial plexus, you can go back and kind of review this slide. It has a couple little clinical correlates here and a few little mnemonics and ways to remember things. But for now, just go right down the list to try and memorize that. Once you get to the final branches of the brachial plexus, this is a good way to memorize it. Well, maybe. Most alcoholics must really urinate. And, well, that is actually physiologically correct. Most people end up grouping the radial with axillary, and then they just get Marmu, M-A-R-M-U, that works too, but maybe most alcoholics must really urinate. That works for you better. Now, I found this off the internet. It's pretty good actually for just getting the basics down and learning. There's a couple little fine points that are actually inaccurate, so you got to be careful with what you pull off the internet, but they just did such a darn good job that I wanted to keep it. So, how do you memorize the different roots that make up the different final nerves? So, down here on the slide where you have your MARMU, or most alcoholics must really urinate, all these different branches come from different pathways. Where do they come from, right? Does the C8 go this way and down, and do things go backwards and up here and end up over here, right? Where does axillary come from? Which branches? Well, you have this nice little using your hand mnemonic to take it on, and it's three musketeers assassinated, five mice, five rats, and two unicorns. Poor mice, poor unicorns. But here we go. Three musketeers, C5, 6, and 7, musculocutaneous, right? Musketeers. Assassinated, right? C5 and 6, axillary for assassinated. Five mice, median nerve mice. Note the asterisks. We're going to get back to that in a minute. Five rats, rats radial. There you go, C5 to T1. So radial has every component of the brachial plexus that makes it up. Sensory and motor. We're not talking about which ones, but just in general, the radial nerve itself. And two unicorns, funny way to say two, although some cultures they kind of number three like this, so two I guess could work. Two unicorns, C8 and T1, that's the ulnar nerve. Unicorn, ulnar, I mean it's the U. It doesn't sound similar, but it's a U, so that works. Now here's the asterisk here. Occasionally, the median nerve can have a C5 contribution, especially if you have a prefixed plexus where things are shifted up a little bit, then you tend to get more contribution from C5. But for the most part, if you ask any neurosurgeon or neurologist who's worth their salt, they're going to tell you it's not C5 to C1, it's actually C6 to T1. Sensory is C6 and 7, and then the motor is C8 and T1. And by the way, these fingers are not exactly right either. This is not the C5, your thumb, in terms of the dermatomes where the sensory nerves go out into the body. So you have to be careful with that. So you might want to say four mice. So three musketeers assassinated, five rats, four mice, and two unicorns. That could work. Or axed instead of assassinated. You could try the AX if that works for you. I don't know. Sensory distribution. This is more accurate. This is more universally considered to be the proper representation of the skin, the dermatomes of the body. Another easy way that I would like you to remember it is, well, how Leonard Nimoy or Mr. Spock taught me this. He's just giving you dermatomes of the body, C6, C7, C8. So there you go. And if we want to round out the pop culture, if anyone did not know The Three Musketeers, an original book written many years ago, I encourage you to read it. Of course, there's goofy movies made about it, and of course the candy bar, but that's where Three Musketeers come from. All right, moving on. Now, the brachial plexus, that'll take you pretty darn far with that mnemonic to draw it out and know the different branches, but there are a couple other extra branches here and there, and this is where things just get tricky, and sometimes you just got to do it to learn it, and this is where the concept of spaced repetition comes in. Do it now, do it again tomorrow, do it again next time it pops up in lecture, and eventually over time you're going to get much better at it and much quicker to draw it out. Conveniently, things are grouped fairly well. There's a couple that have two here, three here, and there's just one coming from the lateral cord. So it becomes quicker when you draw it out. I'm going to demonstrate that pretty soon. So I use these markers here to draw this brachial plexus here. I have another video, I'll put it in the description. Took my time, drew it all out, used some mnemonics, about 5 minutes. It was pretty straightforward. However, I did this very one right here, just quickly drawn out and color-coded, 30 seconds. And I bet you could beat me, especially if you don't even do the color coding. And I encourage you to see how fast you can draw it. Okay, we're going to wrap some things up here. Lower extremity time. A lot of people hear, oh, did that guy tear his ACL or his meniscus? What's the difference? Well, once you learn the anatomy, it becomes pretty obvious. ACL is a ligament tear right down in the middle. That is very devastating and often needs surgery if you want to go back to aggressive exercise and sport. Meniscal tears on the side, that is cartilage, that actually largely can be treated non-surgically, and people can get back into things with just physical therapy. So pretty big difference. Anatomy is power. Once you learn the anatomy, it helps you understand how problematic an injury can be and whether it might need surgery or not. Another one that just comes up all the time, Osgood Schlatters. I don't know why people just keep asking about it. It just must come up somewhere in just general life or pop culture or something. Perhaps when you were younger, some of you had it or knew a friend that had it. Your knee has growth plates that are made of cartilage. They have not fully calcified and hardened, scratch that, ossified and turned into bone yet. So that growth plate is a weak spot. And as in this drawing showing here, this is, imagine your leg standing up and you're viewing from the side. So the front of your knee is to the right and the back of your knee is to the left. There's your kneecap, your patella. Follow the tendon down right here. There's a little growth plate here where things have not fully hardened yet, and that is a source of stress or strain. If you do a lot of activity that, well, requires your quadriceps to contract and pull on the edge of that bone where the tendon attaches to, and the bone and the other bone and the growth plate in the middle, there's going to be some opposing forces. And since things haven't hardened yet, your tendon's going to win. The tendon is stronger than your still forming bone when you are young and just before or in the early stages of puberty, before the growth plates close, and you pull that area out, and then eventually it has to fill in with bone, so you get a bump of well, extra bone on the front of your knee. You likely have seen this in someone just because it's so darn common, and maybe that's why a lot of people hear about it or know about it. That's Osgood Schlatters. That happens when you're younger. It's not an adult problem. It's a pre-teen and early teen problem. And one more that just comes up a lot, and a lot of students ask about it, is what is compartment syndrome? They've heard about this. Well, if you imagine a cross-section of your leg, you have different compartments in your leg that are bound pretty tightly by fascia, which is this very thick fibrous tissue that's not very compliant or stretchy. And if you get an injury or you get a fracture, you get some bleeding, or even just really intense amount of overuse, such as like running a marathon or going straight uphill, those muscles work out so hard and they start swelling. Um, if you get a fracture and there's bleeding, that's a much easier example of this. It'll bleed into that compartment. Eventually, things will just fill up and it cannot accommodate anymore. And since the fascia can't stretch, the pressure just starts to increase in that compartment, and the most fragile thing is going to get squeezed out, which in this case is the nerves and the blood vessels. So people start to get all these, well, uncomfortable symptoms like numbness, tingling, cold sensation. Their leg feels, cold and it looks pale. Not good. This can be an emergency, and you may need surgery for this. It's kind of a scary surgery. If you Google compartment syndrome surgery, and you get what's called four compartment fasciitis, where they literally cut like a fillet down your leg in all four compartments to just open things up. It's pretty nasty. So be careful when you're exercising.